The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus said to the Pharisees, "There was a rich man who dressed in purple garments and fine linen and dined sumptuously each day. And lying at his door was a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who would gladly have eaten his fill of the scraps that fell from the rich man's table. Dogs even used to come and lick his sores. When the poor man died, he was carried away by angels to the bosom of Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried, and from the netherworld, where he was in torment, he raised his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. And he cried out, 'Father Abraham, have pity on me. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, where I am suffering torment in these flames.' Abraham replied, 'My child, remember that you received what was good during your lifetime, while Lazarus likewise received what was bad. But now he is comforted here, whereas you are tormented. Moreover, between us and you, a great chasm is established to prevent anyone from crossing who might wish to go from our side to yours or from your side to ours.' He said, 'Then I beg you, Father, send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they too become to this place of torment.' But Abraham replied, 'They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them.' He said, 'Oh no, Father Abraham, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent.' Then Abraham said, 'If they will not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded if someone should rise from the dead.'" The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Good morning. Well, I have been told that this is the gospel that I should be asking for money from you. What are you all laughing about for, huh? I hear that there's a famous joke about that the pastor who receives a phone call from the IRS. And the IRS, the pastor answers the phone, and he says, "This is the pastor," and he says, "This is so-and-so from the IRS. Is Jim Hart from your parish?" And he says, yeah, Jim Hart, he's very, very involved in our parish. And then the IRS guy says, "Has he given you, the community, a $10,000 donation?" And the pastor sits there for a second, he says, "He will." This is really not about giving money. This is looking at our relationship with the Lord, and also recognizing that we have to have our eyes open to be able to see what's before us, to be able to be participants in God's mercy and His care. I'm always amazed when we get to the Old Testament and New Testament, how much of the Old Testament, all the things that are said in so much in the Old Testament, Jesus repeats. He doesn't change. When he says, I come not to change the law, I come to make certain that you realize what it's about. And so what we see in the story of Amos, did you hear that first story? You may have gotten a little bit confused because it refers to Zion, which is really another term for Jerusalem. And it refers to the area of Joseph and his family. And of course, you all know who Joseph is. Remember Joseph in the Technicolor raincoat or whatever it was? Yeah, you'll all remember it from the plays or whatever. But Joseph is that, he was the one who his family, his brothers hated him, sold him to slavery. He goes into Egypt. He becomes very popular with the person in Egypt, and he turns around and his family ends up coming down, and he serves them and helps them and forgives them. And after they leave, the family of Joseph goes up and lives in the northern territory, the northern part of Israel. And so that's what it was when the family of Joseph, he is referring to the northern territories of Israel. Well, Amos is at a time where he's looking at the people in Jerusalem, and they're so caught up with the good things and the good life that they're having, that he's telling you're eating family of nice fat off the calf and everything else, and you're having a great life and everything else, and you're being oblivious to what's going on in the north. And what's going on in the north is the Syrians invaded the northern territory and decimated the whole countryside of their people. I mean, and you're not paying any attention to this. You're so oblivious because you're so caught up with your life. And of course, we have the story of Jesus. He tells the story to the Pharisees, and what does he say? Talks about the wealthy man. I love this passage. It's a great story, and because there's a lot of nuances in this story, in the sense that the wealthy man doesn't get a name. If you notice that, it could be our name. That's what it's meant to be. And he says the wealthy man has lived high on the hog. And he had this big home, and there was poor Lazarus. He was at his gate, never begged, but he was just there. He was just there, and he was so poor he could barely move, and even the sores, or the dogs were licking the sores on his body. And so what happens? The wealthy man just never notices it, or never really is more so concerned with his own life, just like the story of Amos. And so what he says, well, when Lazarus dies, he goes straight to the bosom of Abraham. And then when the wealthy man died, if you noticed, he had a burial. He says the wealthy man died and was buried, which goes to show you that there was big fanfare about his death. We see that a lot. Big fanfare because he's got money. And so he proceeded that he dies, and where does he go? Y'all know where he goes. Okay. He goes, and he's there in the hot, and he looks up and he sees Lazarus at the bosom of Abraham. And what does he do? He proceeds to say, Abraham, get Lazarus down here to dip his hand in water and quench my thirst. He's still looking at Lazarus as a servant. He doesn't get it. He doesn't get the needs of. So Abraham proceeds to tell him, you had everything in your life. Poor Lazarus, you ignored him completely. And he says now, and I love this part, he says, there's a great chasm between us. And who caused that chasm between the wealthy man? Duh. The message is very clear in the sense that open your eyes. Open your eyes. See what's around us. See the needs of others. Make certain that we give of ourselves. That's who we are as Christians. That's what we are called to be, to share ourselves with each other. So important. So very important, because that's what makes us. You know, I hear all the time people say, oh, I'm a good Christian and that. And so what do you do? And they don't know. I mean, well, I go to church. I live a good life. Yeah, but do you give of yourself? Do you tithe? Do you share what God has given you? You know, we as Americans are the wealthiest nation still in this world. But also, we as Americans have ignored so many of the homeless and the needy of this world that we fail to see, because we get so caught up with what we have. I hear it all the time. You know, I hear some people come to me and they tell me about, oh, Father, I'm having so much trouble with my maid. How many of you have maids? Nobody wants to admit that now, okay. But the thing is that we seem to get so caught up with our little world that we don't see what's beyond us. Now, I must admit, I go down the street and I see all these guys at the corners. You know, they come by and they're limping and everything else, and I'm thinking, and I know some of it's not real. Some of they're working a plan. But the reality is that we still need to be able to not necessarily give to them, but give to the needs of others, so that the others, the people in need, really will be helped. So important for us to do that. So important for us to be aware of that, because that's what Jesus is telling us. He's telling us, make certain that you have your eyes open to those around you. Don't be so caught up in what we have, so caught up in what we're doing, that we fail to see that our brothers beside us are starving or in need or hungry or without homes. Because that's what we are called as Christians to be. And Jesus is telling us, it's the same story of the Old Testament. Really, the only thing of the New Testament that this gospel has for us is that when the wealthy person says well, get someone to tell my brothers. You know, I'm still concerned about my family, and I didn't forget anybody else. But tell my brothers that what they should be doing. And he says, well, you got the prophets, and you got all those people that tried to have their eyes open. And he says, yes, but if someone would come back from the dead. Do we know anybody like that? Duh. Do we know anybody like that? Who? Yes, he comes back from the dead, and we still don't listen. And it's so true in this gospel, because he's the one who dies for us and gives us the example of not concerning himself, but concerning every single one of us. This is so important for us to see. I want to mention to you something else that ever since I've been in this parish, and I've done this in every parish that I've been a part of, is I've organized that the parish tithes. This parish tithes. It's taken me a couple years to finally get this worked out, but we take 10% of our gross income and put it aside and into a charity account, and give to the poor and the needy and all the charitable organizations. We tithe, and I've done that in every parish. And it's not just to blow up our own horn or whatever. What it is it's meant for us to realize that every single one of us is called to give of ourselves. And tithing does that. Tithing makes us aware that this is not all for me. It's for me to do the work of God. To be able to give of myself in some sense, in a financial sense, but in a mind and heart sense, to the needs of others. Just yesterday, we attended the JMJ conference, and because we tithed in this parish, we were able to give them, the JMJ group, a very sizable donation for their ministry. And I'm very proud of that, because you are a part of that. And we as a community should look at ourselves and say, yes, our church does it, do I? And it's a reminder to us that we are called to give, not just money, but give of ourselves for the needs of others. That's what Jesus is preaching here. That's, believe it or not, that's what Amos was preaching here as well. Let us profess that faith now. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. I believe in one Lord, Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, born of the Father before all ages, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, consubstantial with the Father. Through him all things were made. For us men and for our